Story Chapter 12 Zobeide's Story. Dear Commander of the Faithful, she said, the following story I am telling you is one of the strangest stories no one has ever heard of. The two female black dogs and I are originally three sisters born to the same parents. I will tell you why they turned into dogs. The two young women who lived with me and are present here are also my sisters but have different fathers. The sister whose chest is full of scars is called Amin, the other girl is called Safi, and I am Zobeide. After our father passed away, the wealth he left behind was divided equally among all of us. After receiving their share, the two sisters parted ways and each returned to live with her biological mother. My two sisters and I stayed to live with my mother. Then our mother passed away, leaving us each 1,000 sequins. When we all received our full share of property, my two sisters, I was the youngest, became a family and followed our husbands and left me alone. A short time after marriage, my eldest sister's husband sold all his assets and house furnishings and the couple went to live in Africa. Here, the husband spent wastefully, drinking and drinking, so it didn't take long for his capital and my sister's own capital to run out. Finally, finding himself completely broke, he found an excuse to abandon his wife and send her away. My sister returned to Baghdad, having gone through many hardships on a long trip. She came to stay at my house in an extremely pitiful condition, which saddened even the hardened hearts. I received her with all the love she could expect from me. I asked her the cause of this miserable situation. She cried and told me about her husband's bad behavior and his cruel treatment of her. I was very touched by her misfortune and could not hold back my tears of sympathy. I told her to go take a shower, gave her my clothes to change into and told her, "My sister, you are the eldest sister, I consider you as my mother. When you leave here to follow your husband, you will get your property." Thanks to God, I used that little capital to raise silkworms and made a living. Please consider everything I have here as yours, you can use it however you want. For many months, we lived together in harmony. We always talked about our second sister and were surprised that there was absolutely no news. It turned out that she was also sick. Was in the same deplorable situation as you. Your husband also treated you with the same cruelty. And I received you with the same cordiality. Some time later my two sisters, under the excuse of not wanting to be a burden to me forever, expressed my desire to remarry. I replied to the two sisters that if they had no reason other than thinking they were a burden to me, then please feel free to live with me, being my capital. Mine is enough to provide all three of us with a life that is not too needy. But I added, I'm afraid you guys want to move on. If that's true, then honestly I'm extremely surprised. After the experience you just went through in a not-so-good marriage, do you still want to fall into it a second time? It's no surprise to you that finding a genuine man is extremely difficult these days. Believe me, let's continue living together like this, isn't it cozy and comfortable? All the sincere words I said to them were completely useless. They decided to get married again and they carried out that decision. But, just a few months later they came back and earnestly apologized for not following my advice. "I'm your youngest sister," they told me, "but I'm much wiser than you guys. If you are willing to accept us again and treat us as your slaves, we will never make the same mistake again." Dear sisters, I replied, since the day you guys broke up recently, I still love you, nothing has changed for you. Ladies, please come back here and enjoy together what I own." I hugged and kissed them, and we lived together again like before. For a year, we lived in solidarity, and God blessed our small capital to grow. I came up with the idea of taking a trip to the sea and trying my luck in business. So my two sisters and I moved to Balsora and bought a fully equipped ship, loaded with goods, which I had brought from Baghdad. Sailing and with a favorable wind, we were soon across the Gulf of Persique. Setting sail, we headed straight for India, and after 20 days at sea, we saw land. It is a very high mountain. At the foot of the mountain is a city with a very prosperous appearance. Because the wind was favorable, we docked early and dropped anchor. Not having the patience to wait for my sisters to put on makeup and prepare to follow, I got off the train alone and went straight to the city. I saw a crowd, some sitting, some standing, each holding a stick in his hand, all with terribly ugly faces that frightened me. But seeing that everyone was silent and motionless, and even the pupils of their eyes did not move, I confidently moved closer and saw that they were people who had turned to stone. I went into the city, through many streets, where at intervals there were people in all sorts of positions, but they were all motionless because they had turned to stone. In the shopping area, most of the shops were closed, and in the few shops that were open, the people there were petrified. Looking up at the chimneys of the kitchens, not seeing the smoke, I guess everyone inside the house as well as those outside were turned to stone. Arriving in front of a large construction site in the middle of the city, I discovered a large double-open gate plated with pure gold plates. In front there is a silk curtain hanging down and a lamp hanging right above the gate. After looking closely at the building, I had no doubt that it was the palace of a monarch ruling this country. But to my great surprise, I didn't see a single creature, but I hoped that someone might be seen here. I raised the curtain and was even more surprised to see under the vestibule a few gatekeepers or watchmen all turned to stone, some standing, some sitting or half lying and half sitting. I passed through a large yard filled with people. These people seemed to be leaving, those people were coming, and no one moved because they were as petrified as everyone else they had met. I passed through a second yard and then to a third yard. Everywhere was lonely and eerily silent. Approaching a fourth courtyard, I saw right in front of me a splendid mansion whose windows were covered with solid gold grills. Guessing that was the Queen's residence, I went in. In a room, many black eunuchs were found petrified. Stepping forward to a luxuriously decorated room, I saw a lady who had also turned to stone. I knew it was the Queen because on her head there was a golden crown and a string of pearls that were very round and larger than chestnuts. I looked closely and thought I had never seen anything more beautiful. I looked for a moment at all the wealth and luxury in this room, especially the doormat, the cushions, and the canopy covered with Indian cloth embroidered with gold thread and figures of people and objects embroidered with silver thread. And exquisite. Scheherazade would have continued telling the story if she hadn't seen the dawn light that had crept into the bedroom. The emperor listened passionately. He stood up and said to himself, "I need to know the story of the people turned to stone. Where will this strange thing go?" Dinarzade was very interested in the first part of Zobeide's story, so he did not forget to call the Queen before dawn. "Sister? If you are awake, please continue to tell me what happened." Zobeide also saw what was in the strange palace she had entered. This young woman, said Scheherazade, continued her story to the emperor as follows. Your Majesty, she said from her room, petrified queen, I passed through many chambers and rooms in the palace. These places were all very clean and magnificent. At last I came to an unusually large room, where there was a high platform of solid gold. Several steps and studded with very large jade stones. On the pedestal is a bed covered with pearl-trimmed brocade. What was most surprising and admirable was seeing a bright light shooting out from that bed. Curious to know the situation, I climbed up, raised my head and saw on the stool a diamond the size of an ostrich egg, so perfect that not a single blemish could be seen on its body. The glowing diamond blinded my eyes. On both sides of the bed are 2 lit torches for unknown purposes. Anyway, in such a situation, it makes me guess that there is someone living in this magnificent palace because the torches cannot light themselves. Many unusual things kept me in this room. The diamond I just mentioned alone was priceless. Because all the doors were left open or only slightly closed, I went into other rooms that were just as beautiful and luxurious as the ones I had passed through. I went to the kitchens and warehouses filled with treasures and was so absorbed in all these wonders that I forgot about myself. I no longer thought about the ship or my sisters, but only thought about how to satisfy my curiosity. But the coming night reminded me that it was time to leave. I wanted to return to the path through the courtyards from which I had come, but it was not easy to find it again. I got lost in the rooms and found myself again in a large room with a high pedestal, a bed, a huge diamond, and lit torches. I decided to spend the night here and early tomorrow morning I would find my way back to my ship. I laid down and couldn't help but shiver with fear at being alone in a deserted place like this, and it was probably because of the fear that I couldn't sleep. At around midnight I suddenly heard what sounded like a man reading the Quran, in the same style and voice as we usually read in our mosques. This makes me extremely happy. I immediately jumped up and grabbed a torch to light the way. I walked from room to room toward the direction I heard the voice echoing. Stopping in front of the door of a room, I saw an unmistakable voice coming from inside. I put the torch on the ground and looked through the crack in the door to see the room like a preaching hall. Yes, just like in our temple, there is an ark for believers to turn to pray. Hanging lamps are lit and 2 candlesticks with large white candles are also burning. I also saw a small mat spread out in the same way as we do to place ourselves on and pray. A young man with a gentle face was sitting on the carpet, attentively reading the Quran placed on a small shelf in front of him. Seeing that, my heart was filled with admiration, and I wondered in my mind how it was possible that he was the only one living in a city where everyone had turned to stone and there was no doubt about it. There's something oddly unusual about this. Because the door was only ajar, I pushed it open, stepped in and stood up straight in front of the door, chanting out loud a prayer. Praise God for blessing us with smooth sailing. Please bless and protect us. Carry us like that until we return to our home country. Please hear and accept our prayer. The young man looked at me and said, Madam, please tell me who you are and what brings you to this gloomy city. In return, I will tell you who I am, what has happened to me and why the entire population of this city is in the situation you have seen and why only I was safe and sound in this terrible scene of devastation. I briefly told him where I came from, what made me make this journey and how I was lucky enough to land after 20 days floating on the water. When I finished telling him, I asked him to fulfill his promise and also expressed my emotion because of the tragic scenes of all the places I had been to. "Ladies," said the young man, "please be patient." Having finished speaking, he closed the Quran, put it in a precious bag and placed it in the coffin. I took advantage of this moment to look closely at the young man and saw that he was so beautiful and graceful that I felt a flutter in my heart, a feeling I had never felt before. He asked me to sit next to him, and before he started the story, I couldn't help but tell him the feelings he had evoked in me. A bit of a dear and beloved boy. No one could be more impatient than I at this moment, waiting for some clarification on the many strange events that had met my eyes from the first step I took into his city that my curiosity had not yet revealed. "Be satisfied. Please speak. Please tell me by what miracle you are the only one still alive among so many people who have died unnaturally." Scheherazade stopped at this point and said to Shahryar, "Your Majesty, it must be you. I haven't noticed that it's just dawn. If I continue to tell it, I'm afraid I'll be known to take advantage of your too much attention." The emperor stood up and decided that he would listen to the rest of this particularly strange story the following night. Oh, sister. If you are awake," Dinarzade called to you before dawn the next day, "then I would like you to continue telling me what happened between Zobeide and the young man you met in the palace that you described. It's very beautiful." "I will please you right away," said the queen. Zobeide continued her story as follows. "Madam, the young man told me, I see that you know God well. Bored with the prayer just now. You will hear the following story that will clarify his greatness and power. I would like to say that this city is the capital of a powerful country whose name my father's king bears. This king, his court, the inhabitants of the city and all his servants were magicians, worshipping the god of fire and Nardun, the former king of the giants who fought against God. Even though I was born to pagan parents, I was fortunate during my childhood to have a tutor, a gentle Muslim woman who knew the Quran by heart and preached it to perfection. She used to always tell me, 'Dear Prince, there is only one true God. Remember, you are not allowed to acknowledge or worship others.' She taught me how to read Arabic and I learned to read right from the Quran she gave me. When I began to understand, she explained to me all the good points in every aspect of that perfect book and imbued me with the spirit of Islam hidden from my father and everyone. She passed away, but was able to give me the necessary knowledge to completely believe in the truth of Islam. Since her death, I still remember her teachings and am terrified of the evil god Nardun and the believers who worship the fire god. 3 years and 3 months ago, a voice suddenly rang throughout the city and everyone heard every word clearly. O people, abandon the worship of Nardun and the god of fire. Worship the only God of love and mercy. From the same voice rang out for 3 years straight, but no one converted. On the last day of the 3rd year, around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the entire population turned to stone for a moment, their lips in the same position as at that time. My father's king shared the same fate. He turned into black stone as seen in one place in the palace, and so did my mother's queen. I am the only person to whom God has not inflicted terrible punishment. From that day on I continued to serve. You have an unprecedented fervor, and beautiful lady, I believe he sent you here to comfort me. I would like to express my utmost gratitude to him because, to be honest with you, this lonely life has made me extremely depressed." All the story and especially the words said at the end touched my heart. Towards him became even more intense. "Dear Prince," I told him, "there is no doubt that it was the Supreme Being who took the risk that I came here to meet you and to take you out of this place full of sorrow. Hey! The ship that brought me here is enough to make you believe that I am also somewhat famous in Baghdad, where I also have quite a large fortune. I take the liberty to offer you a place to stay until the time comes." The ruler of the faithful, the representative of the great prophet whom he had known, recognized him and bestowed upon him all the honors he deserved. This famous monarch who dwelt in Baghdad, would soon know him to your capital, will let you know that it is not in vain to ask for your favor. It is impossible for you to stay any longer in a city where everything is unbearable for you. My ship is at your service and you can use it with absolute freedom." The prince accepted and we discussed leaving for the rest of the night. The next morning, we left the palace and went to the harbor. My sisters, the captain, and my slaves are all very worried about me. After introducing my sisters to the prince, I told them the reason why they could not return to the ship the day before, the meeting with the young prince, his story and the cause of the disaster for a prosperous city. Such rule. It took the sailors a long time to unload the goods I had brought and replace them with the most precious things in the palace, made of precious stones, gold, and silver. We had to leave behind wooden furniture and countless gold and silver items because we couldn't take them away. It would probably take many ships to carry all the assets in front of them. After loading the boat with everything we wanted to bring, we took out more food and fresh water. As for food, there's still plenty left because of supplies in Balsora. Finally, we set sail in a favorable wind as expected. At this point, it was just dawn. Scheherazade stopped, and the emperor stood up without saying anything. But he promised himself that he would hear about it. At the end of Zobeide's story, the young prince miraculously survived. At the end of the next night, Dinarzade, anxious to know how the return train went, called out to the queen, "Sister, if you are awake, I beg you to finish telling me yesterday's story. Please tell me whether the young prince and Zobeide reached Baghdad with smooth sailing." "Then you will understand, my dear," said Scheherazade. Zobeide still spoke to the emperor, continuing as follows. "Your Majesty Zobeide," said the young prince, "his two sisters and concubine talked happily and warmly every day. But, alas! Our peaceful unity did not last long. The sisters became jealous because they noticed the special affection between the prince and me, and one day asked me mischievously what they would do with the prince when he returned to Baghdad. I clearly saw that by asking that question, the sisters wanted to probe my feelings. So, pretending to be playful, I answered them that I would marry the prince. Then I turned to him and said, 'Please, my prince, agree. When I return to Baghdad, I want to give myself to you to become your slave, serve you and recognize you as my absolute master.' 'Madam,' the prince replied, 'I'm not sure if this is just a joke or not, but as for me, I would like to declare very seriously in front of your sisters, that I am very happy to accept this. I offer you, not to treat you as a slave, but as my wife, my princess, and promise not to have any dominance in all my actions.' My sisters' faces changed when they heard the above words, and I realized that from then on their attitude towards me was no longer the same. We have reached the Bay of Persik, and are approaching Balsora, and with the present favorable wind, I hope to reach this port tomorrow. But during the night, while I was fast asleep, my sisters carried me and threw me into the sea. The prince also met the same fate and drowned. I struggled for a while on the water's surface, and fortunately, more like by miracle, I felt my feet touch the ground. I stepped into a black space that seemed like land because the darkness was so thick that it was impossible to distinguish. Sure enough, I set foot on a sandy beach and the dawn light gradually brightened. I found myself on a small desert island, about 20 nautical miles from Balsora. Soon, under the sun, my clothes were dry, and as I walked, I noticed that on the island there were many edible fruits and fresh water. I hoped to somehow preserve my life. While resting in the shade, I suddenly saw a snake with very large and very long wings meandering and slithering towards me, its tongue hanging out. Guessing that something was threatening it, I stood up and saw another snake bigger than it holding its tail and trying hard to swallow it alive. I should have run away, but out of compassion, I stopped and boldly picked up a large rock that was fortunately within my reach and threw it with all my might, hitting the big snake's head, killing it. The winged snake, escaping danger, immediately raised its wings and soared away. I kept looking at it up high like a strange object until it was out of sight, then went to rest in the shade in another place and fell asleep. When I woke up, you can imagine my surprise when I saw next to me a black woman with sharp but gentle features holding in her hands two black female dogs on leashes. I sat up and asked who she was. "I am," she replied, "the winged snake that you freed from a violent enemy not long ago. I think there is nothing better than the deed I just did to repay the great favor you have done. I know about the betrayal of your two sisters. To avenge you when I was free thanks to your generous help, I summoned many of you who are also fairies like me, along with you. Take all the goods on the ship and transfer them to your warehouses in Baghdad before sinking the ship. These two female black dogs are your two sisters that I turned into. But this punishment is not yet complete. It's not enough, I want you to still treat them the way I say." Saying that, the fairy hugged me tightly with one arm and the two dogs with the other, flew into the air and took them all to my home in Baghdad. I saw in the warehouse all the property with which my ship was loaded. Before parting, she gave me two bitches and said, "If you don't want to be turned into a bitch like your sisters, then obey my orders. In the name of the God who governs all the rivers and seas on earth, I command you to give each of your sisters 100 lashes every night to punish them for having sinned against you and the prince." That young man drowned. I must promise you that I will obey your orders. And since then, I have behaved, every night with as much reluctance as your Majesty has witnessed. With the tears I cried after each spanking, I wanted to show my sisters how much pain and impatience I felt in having to fulfill a duty that was so harsh, that I deserved to complain more than to deserve it. Be blamed. If there is anything related to me that your Majesty wishes to know, my sister Amin will serve you with her own story." After hearing all of Zobeide's story, with admiration, the emperor ordered the prime minister to order the gentle Amin to come and explain to the emperor why her body was full of scars. "But, your Majesty, summer here," Scheherazade said. "It's just dawn. I won't keep you any longer." Shahryar is sure that the story Scheherazade continues to tell will be the end of all that has been told before he said to himself, I needed to have the full pleasure. He stood up and decided to let the queen live another day. Dinarzade passionately wanted to hear about Amin. So, he woke up before it was dawn for a long time before waking the queen. My dear sister, if you don't sleep anymore, please tell me why that lovely Amin has breasts along the scar. I agree, Scheherazade replied, and without wasting time, you will see that Amin, addressing the emperor, began her story as follows. Thank you for joining us for today's fairy tale. We hope these stories bring joy and meaning to your day. If you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting tales. Wishing you a good night and sweet dreams. See you in the next story.